I never thought I'd be the guy writing something like this. You know, the type of story you scroll past on forums, thinking, damn, glad that's not me. But here I am. My name's Ethan. I'm 38, married for nearly 10 years to Lisa. She's 36, sharp as a tack, beautiful in that effortless way. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and change the temperature without saying a word. I used to think I was the luckiest man alive. Now I know better. We met at a coffee shop of all places. She spilled her drink on me. Cliché, right? But that's how it started. A ruined shirt, a sheepish apology, a conversation that felt too easy, too natural. It led to dinner, then weekends spent wrapped up in each other's lives. And eventually, vows exchanged under a sky that seemed as endless as the promises we made. Our life was simple, or at least it seemed that way. We had a modest house in the suburbs, 2 cars, no kids, by choice. We traveled when we could, hosted dinner parties, argued about small things like who left the kitchen light on. It was ordinary, and I liked it that way. But looking back, I see it now. The cracks weren't sudden. They were slow, like water seeping into wood, rotting it from the inside long before you noticed the damage. Started small. Lisa's phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was suddenly always face down. She started working late, saying her firm had picked up a new client that needed extra attention. I believed her. I mean, why wouldn't I? She was Lisa. My Lisa. The woman who once drove across town in the middle of the night because I said I wasn't feeling well. But then there were the missed calls. The whispered conversations behind closed doors. The perfume she never used to wear. Something expensive, bold, unlike her usual subtle scents. She said it was a free sample from a coworker. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. Still, the unease crept in, stubborn and quiet. I started noticing more. Text messages she'd clear before I could glance. Sudden plans with friends I'd never met. Her laughter softer, distant, like she was somewhere else even when she was right beside me. I told myself it was nothing. Just work stress, maybe. A phase. People drift sometimes, right? You pull them back. That's what marriage is about. But deep down, something ugly was growing. A feeling I couldn't shake, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground beneath you isn't as solid as it seems. And then, one night, everything changed. I wasn't supposed to be home early. A client meeting got canceled last minute. No big deal. I grabbed some takeout, Lisa's favorite, thinking it'd be a nice surprise. I pulled into the driveway, noticed her car already there. She'd said she'd be late. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. I called her name, no answer. The lights in the hallway were dim, casting long shadows. My heart thudded a little harder than usual, though I didn't know why yet. Then I heard it. A faint laugh. Not Lisa's usual laugh, but softer, almost a whisper, came from the guest room. Our guest room. I don't know what I expected when I opened that door. But it wasn't what I found. And that's where it really began. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, the bag of takeout slipping from my hand, spilling its contents onto the floor with a dull thud. But I didn't flinch. My mind couldn't process the mess of rice and sauce spreading across the carpet because something far worse was unraveling right in front of me. Lisa wasn't alone. She was with someone, another man. Not just with him, but wrapped around him like he was the center of her universe. The man's face was partially hidden, but his smug grin was unmistakable, etched into my memory the second I saw it. His hands were on her in ways that used to be mine. His lips against her neck, whispering things I could only guess at. My breath caught in my throat. You'd think in a moment like that, rage would be the first thing to hit you. But it wasn't. It was disbelief. A surreal, out-of-body numbness, like I wasn't really there. Like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Lisa didn't notice me at first. She was too involved, too busy betraying every promise we'd ever made. But when she finally looked up, her face went pale, her smile vanishing like it had never existed. "Ethan," she stammered, scrambling to sit upright, pulling the sheets around her like modesty mattered now. I thought you were working late. I thought you were working late." That's what she said.
No epalegi. No explanation.
Just an excuse hanging in the thick, suffocating air. The guy didn't even bother to look ashamed. He just sat there, smirking, as if he'd won something. I didn't say a word. Not at first. I just stared at her, trying to reconcile this stranger with the woman I'd shared a life with. The woman who kissed me goodbye every morning. The woman who promised, "It's always been you." But it hadn't been. Clearly. She finally stood, her voice trembling. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like." I actually laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like mine. "It's exactly what it looks like, Lisa." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. I didn't want her excuses. I didn't need her lies. Not anymore. Without another word, I turned and walked out, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I grabbed my keys, left the house, and drove aimlessly for hours. I don't even remember where I went. Gas stations, empty parking lots, anywhere but home. Home. What a joke. That place wasn't my home anymore. It was just four walls filled with broken promises. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even get angry, not yet. I just felt empty. But emptiness doesn't last forever. Eventually, it makes room for something else. And for me, that something else was revenge. I didn't go home that night, or the night after. I crashed at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls are thin, and the silence feels heavier than it should. I stared at the stained ceiling for hours, replaying everything in my head. The look on Lisa's face when she saw me. The smug expression on that guy's face. Like he owned something that wasn't his. I kept thinking, was there a sign I missed? Maybe the late nights, the distant smiles, the sudden work trips. But even if there were signs, I never imagined it would lead to this. You don't look for cracks when you think your foundation is solid. You just assume it'll hold. I didn't call her. She tried, though, over and over. First, it was texts. "Ethan, please come home. Let's talk."
I'm sorry.
"It's not what you think. I made a mistake. Please just call me." Then the voicemails came. Her voice, shaky and soft, saying things like, "I miss you, and we can fix this." But I didn't listen to them all. Couldn't. Hearing her voice felt like sandpaper against an open wound. But here's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't just break you. It wakes you up. By the third day, something inside me shifted. The shock wore off, and the numbness faded. In its place, a cold, focused clarity settled in. Not the blind, chaotic rage you'd expect. No, this was different. It was sharp, controlled. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to cry. I wanted to destroy her. Not in the way you're probably thinking. I didn't want to hurt her physically. That's not me. But emotionally, mentally, I wanted her to feel what I felt. No, worse than that. I wanted her to drown in it. So I made a plan. I went back home. Not because I forgave her or needed answers. I went because I needed information. The house was eerily quiet when I stepped inside, like it knew something was wrong. Lisa was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. "Ethan," she whispered, standing up like she was going to rush over to me. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, letting the silence do the talking. She stopped mid-step, her hands trembling. "Please, just talk to me." So I did. I sat down across from her, leaned back in the chair, and gave her a look that made her shift uncomfortably. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice flat. She swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter. He's no one." Wrong answer. I smiled. Not a real smile, a cold, empty one. "If he's no one, then this shouldn't be hard. Tell me his name." She hesitated. That was all I needed. In that pause, she gave me everything. The guilt, the fear, the realization that she was cornered. But I wasn't angry. Not outwardly. No, I stayed calm because anger makes you sloppy. And I needed to be precise. While she stumbled through weak excuses, I was already planning my next move. This wasn't about understanding why anymore. It was about making sure she never forgot who she betrayed. Lisa kept talking, her words blending into a meaningless hum. Apologies, excuses, half-hearted justifications. It was like listening to static. None of it mattered. I wasn't there to hear her out. I was there to watch her squirm, to see the cracks form in that polished, confident exterior she always carried. It was a mistake, Ethan. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, staring straight into her eyes. You didn't mean for it to happen? Did you trip and fall into his arms? Is that how it works? She flinched, her face crumpling with guilt, or maybe just embarrassment for getting caught. I didn't wait for an answer. I stood up, pacing slowly around the room, not because I needed to think, but because I wanted to make her nervous. I wanted her to feel the shift in power. Who is he? I asked again, my voice low, steady. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip like she was debating whether to lie. But she knew better now. His name is Mark, she finally whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. Mark. The name didn't mean anything to me. Yet, how long? I asked. Her silence was the answer. Long enough. I nodded slowly, letting the weight of it settle between us. She probably thought this was the part where I'd scream, throw something, maybe even cry. That's what guilty people expect, an emotional reaction. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled. A small, tight smile that made her shift uncomfortably in her seat. Okay, I said simply, grabbing my keys off the counter. She looked confused. Wait. Where are you going? Out. To do what? Her voice was rising now, panic creeping in. I stopped at the door, turning just enough to glance over my shoulder. To meet Mark. And then I left. I didn't even know where to find him yet. But that didn't matter. I'd figure it out. I always figured things out. Lisa had underestimated me, thought I'd fall apart, maybe even beg her to stay. She was wrong. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to break. I was going to bury them, both of them, under the weight of their own choices. I drove around for a while, my mind sharper than it had been in days. No more confusion, no more heartache. Just focus. I needed information, and Lisa had been sloppy. I went back home hours later, pretending to be calmer, pretending to want to work things out. She bought it. Guilt makes people stupid. She didn't even question why I was suddenly more civil, more composed. That night, while she was asleep, I went through her phone. She changed her passcode, of course. But people are creatures of habit. A few guesses later, I was in. Text messages, photos, calls logged late at night. All the proof I needed, and more. I learned everything about Mark in under an hour. Where he worked, where he lived, even the coffee shop he liked to stop at every morning. But this wasn't just about catching them. This was about ruining them. And I was just getting started. The next morning, Lisa acted like nothing had changed. She made coffee, humming softly to herself, as if the stench of betrayal wasn't thick in the air between us. She smiled when she saw me, that same smile she probably flashed at Mark when they thought no one was watching. I smiled back. She thought I was healing, that maybe the shock had worn off and I was ready to forgive, to move forward. But I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I was interested in precision. While she sipped her coffee, I watched her, memorizing the little details. How she tucked her hair behind her ear, how she bit the corner of her lip when she was nervous. I used to love those things. Now, they were just data points, part of the profile I was building. Mark wasn't hard to find. His address was saved in Lisa's phone under a fake name, but she wasn't as clever as she thought. A quick search of his social media filled in the blanks. He wasn't some stranger passing through. He was someone local, someone confident enough to insert himself into my life, my marriage, without a second thought. That was his first mistake. I spent the next few days collecting information. I followed him to work, watched his routines, noted his weaknesses. He was predictable, a creature of habit. Morning coffee at the same cafe, gym sessions at the same time, parking in the same spot like the world owed him security. Good. Predictable people are easier to break. Lisa, meanwhile, kept pretending. She cooked dinners, left little notes around the house like she used to, and even suggested we take a weekend trip to reconnect. I agreed. Not because I wanted to reconnect, because it gave me time to dig deeper without her hovering. On the third night, while she showered, I copied files from her laptop, emails, photos, everything. There it was. Messages to Mark filled with plans, secrets, even jokes about me. Like I was some oblivious idiot sitting at home while they played house in the shadows. But here's the thing, they weren't laughing anymore. The seeds were planted. I set up anonymous emails, scheduled messages with screenshots of their texts, photos I'd pulled from Lisa's phone, strategically timed to land in Mark's inbox during work hours. I wanted him distracted, paranoid, looking over his shoulder. For Lisa, I had something special planned. I started being the perfect husband. Thoughtful texts, surprise flowers, even suggesting we try again. She latched onto it, desperate to believe I was healing. But beneath the surface, I was laying traps. Little by little, I isolated her. I changed passwords to our shared accounts, moved money into an account she didn't know existed, rerouted mail to a P.O. box. She didn't notice, too busy enjoying the illusion of reconciliation. Mark, on the other hand, was unraveling. His responses grew shorter, his tone more anxious. He stopped meeting Lisa as often, making excuses. I knew because I was tracking him. I was in control. And when everything was set, when the foundation of their little fantasy was cracked and crumbling, I'd flip the switch. They thought the betrayal was the climax. But for me, that was just the prologue. The real story was about to begin. I always believed revenge should be an art form, not loud, not messy. Just precise, calculated, with every detail crafted to leave a scar deeper than the wound itself. Lisa and Mark had written the first draft of this story, but I was rewriting the ending. It started with Mark. I waited until Friday morning. That's when he hit the gym before work, same time, same parking spot, same routine like clockwork. Predictability is a weakness, and Mark wore his like a badge. I parked 2 rows away, watching from behind tinted windows. He strutted out of his car, phone in hand, oblivious to everything except himself. That's the thing about people who cheat. They think they're invincible, like the rules don't apply to them. But rules are funny. They're invisible until someone breaks them. And then they become chains. After he disappeared inside, I walked over to his car. I wasn't there to vandalize it. That would have been too easy, too obvious. No, I had something better. I slipped a small envelope under his windshield wiper. Inside were printed screenshots of his texts with Lisa. Nothing explicit, just enough to make his heart race when he read them. Notes like, "You think he suspects anything? Last night was perfect. Wish I could wake up next to you every day." At the bottom of the last page, I wrote one simple sentence in bold, red ink. "I know everything. No name.
No threats.
Just the truth, sharp and undeniable." Then I waited. From my car, I watched him return, towel slung over his shoulder, still cocky, until he saw the envelope. He glanced around, his face tightening as he pulled it free. His eyes darted across the pages, his posture stiffening with every word. Panic, confusion, paranoia. It was beautiful. He whipped out his phone, typing furiously, probably texting Lisa. I'd disabled her notifications the night before, changing her phone settings while she slept. She wouldn't see a thing until I wanted her to. Mark paced in circles, looking around like whoever left the envelope was still watching. He was right. But this wasn't the real hit. This was just the tap that starts the dominoes falling. That evening, I came home with takeout, Lisa's favorite. She greeted me at the door, her smile wide, her eyes filled with that desperate hope I'd been feeding for weeks. "Long day?" she asked, kissing my cheek. "Yeah," I replied, setting the food down. "But I've been thinking, maybe we should invite some friends over this weekend. Have a little dinner party." She blinked, surprised. "Really? I thought you wanted time for just us." I shrugged, playing the part. "I think it'd be good. A fresh start, you know?" She bought it, hook, line, and sinker. We planned the guest list together, mutual friends, coworkers, and Mark. Of course, Mark. Lisa hesitated when I suggested him, but I acted casual. "You said he's just a friend, right?" She nodded a little too quickly. "Yeah, Just a friend. Perfect. The party was set for Saturday night. Food, drinks, laughter, the whole show. But it wouldn't end with smiles. No, it would end with the truth laid bare, with shattered illusions and broken faces. Because the party wasn't for the guests. It was for Lisa, and it was going to be unforgettable. Saturday arrived with an eerie kind of calm, the kind that settles before a storm tears everything apart. The house was spotless, candles flickering softly, and Lisa buzzed around like a woman desperate to hold on to the life she was slowly losing grip of. Only she didn't know it yet. She wore a navy dress, the one I'd complimented years ago when we were still real. She smiled at me over her glass of wine, thinking everything was falling back into place. She had no idea. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. sharp. Friends trickled in, laughter filling the spaces where tension hid like shadows. I played the perfect host, pouring drinks, telling jokes, even leaning in to kiss Lisa's cheek when no one was looking. It was all part of the performance. And then Mark arrived. I knew him the second I saw him. Tall, overly confident, with that self-satisfied grin that I'd memorized from Lisa's photos. He walked in like he belonged there, shaking my hand with forced ease, as if the guilt wasn't dripping from his skin. I gripped his hand just a little too tight, enough to make him glance at me, searching for something behind my polite smile. "Glad you could make it," I said, locking eyes with him for a second too long. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Good. The night unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Drinks flowed, stories were shared, and laughter masked the silent war brewing beneath the surface. I watched Lisa out of the corner of my eye, how she avoided looking at Mark directly, how her smile tightened whenever he spoke, how her fingers trembled slightly when she poured another glass of wine. She knew, maybe not the full extent, but some part of her felt it, that something was coming. And she was right. Around 9 p.m., when the drinks had softened everyone's edges, I stood up, tapping my glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. "Hey, I just wanted to say something," I began, my voice warm and casual, like this was any other night. "I've been thinking a lot about relationships, about honesty and trust. You know, the foundations we build our lives on." Lisa's smile faltered, just for a split second. Mark shifted in his seat. I continued, "It's funny how people wear masks, pretending everything's perfect when it's not. Pretending they're loyal when they're not." Silence crept in like a slow leak, suffocating the laughter that had filled the room moments before. Lisa's glass hovered near her lips, her knuckles white. Mark coughed, fake laughing. Deep thoughts, huh?" I smiled at him, sharp and thin. "Yeah, real deep." Then I reached under the coffee table and pulled out a small envelope, the same kind I'd left on his car. "I found something recently," I said, holding it up. "Something interesting. Thought I'd share." I tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed with a soft slap, but the sound felt like a gunshot. No one moved. Lisa's face drained of color. Mark's jaw clenched. "Go ahead," I said softly, nodding toward it. "Open it." Mark didn't move, so I stepped closer, my shadow falling over him. "No?" "Okay, I'll do it." I slid the photos and printed texts out, fanning them across the table for everyone to see. Silence. Then, gasps. Eyes darted between Lisa, Mark, and me. Lisa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Ethan, what?" "Sit down," I snapped, my voice dropping the warmth I'd faked all night. She froze, her lips trembling before she slowly sank back into her chair. Mark tried to speak, but I cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice. I let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating. I wanted them to feel it, the weight of their choices, the embarrassment, the humiliation. And then, with a calmness I didn't even know I had, I said, "This is Mark. He's been sleeping with my wife." Gasps again. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared, wide-eyed, at the wreckage unfolding. Lisa opened her mouth, tears brimming, but I raised a hand to stop her. "There's more," I added, pulling out a USB drive from my pocket. "For anyone who doubts the evidence, I've got backups."
Videos.
messages, even bank statements. Because when you betray someone like me, you forget one thing: I pay attention. Mark shot up from his seat, his face flushed. You're insane, man. I chuckled. No, Mark. I'm prepared. And with that, I walked out of my own house, leaving the mess behind. But this wasn't the end. This was just intermission. I didn't look back when I walked out that door. The sounds of gasps, whispers, and Lisa's shaky voice faded behind me, swallowed by the cold night air. The crisp breeze felt good, cleansing almost, like it was washing away the last remnants of the man I used to be. I didn't go far. Just around the corner, where my car was parked, hidden in the shadows. I waited there, leaning against the hood, watching through the narrow slit between two hedges. I wanted to see who'd break first. 15 minutes later, the door burst open. Mark stormed out, face flushed, jaw clenched, his steps frantic like he was walking away from a fire he couldn't put out. I smiled, but I wasn't done with him. Not even close. I got into my car and followed him, keeping my distance. He didn't even notice. His world was spinning too fast now, his confidence shattered. He drove like a man running from something, but you can't outrun consequences. He ended up at his apartment, slamming the door behind him without looking back. I parked nearby, sitting in the darkness, letting my mind race with possibilities. This wasn't about physical revenge.
No punches.
No violence. I wanted something that would last longer than bruises. I wanted to dismantle his life piece by piece. The next day I called in sick to work. Not because I needed time to process, I'd already done that, but because revenge required precision and I needed to be sharp. I started with his job. Through Lisa's emails, I'd found out where he worked, a mid-level manager at some corporate office, the kind of place that prided itself on ethics and professionalism. Funny how people like Mark always had the most to lose. I drafted an anonymous email to his HR department. Attached were screenshots of his affair with Lisa, some incriminating photos, and a carefully worded message hinting at inappropriate conduct, mixing personal relationships with business, potential conflicts of interest, the works. I didn't send it immediately. No, timing was everything. First, I scheduled it to land in their inbox right before his next big presentation, because nothing ruins confidence like knowing your world might collapse while you're trying to keep it together. Then I focused on Lisa. She'd been texting non-stop since the party, her messages shifting from apologies to anger to desperation. I didn't respond. Silence was more powerful than any insult. But I wasn't ignoring her entirely. I forwarded some of her more embarrassing messages, the ones where she trashed her friends behind their backs, the ones where she confessed things I'm sure she never wanted anyone else to know, to those very same people. I made sure they knew exactly who she was beneath the perfect wife act. Friendships shattered. Reputation gone. I even contacted her parents, forwarding a mistakenly sent message that detailed her affair, dripping with just enough faux regret to sound believable. Her mother replied within minutes. A cold, one-sentence response. We'll deal with her. Good. Let them. By the end of the week, the fallout had started. Mark lost his job. Lisa was cut off by her closest friends. Her family stopped returning her calls. But the best part? They still thought it was over. They thought the damage was done. They had no idea I was just getting started. Revenge isn't just about striking once. It's about the aftershocks, the ripples that keep crashing long after the initial blow. I wanted Lisa and Mark to feel every tremor, to wake up each day wondering when the next hit would come. And I made sure they never felt safe. After Mark lost his job, I expected him to lie low, lick his wounds. But cheaters like him don't reflect, they deflect. A few days later, I saw him at a bar, drinking alone, face hardened with bitterness instead of regret. He still had that smugness in him, buried under the surface. Good. I wasn't done with him yet. I hired someone, a private investigator. Not because I needed dirt on Mark. I already had plenty. No, this was about control. I wanted to know his routines, his weaknesses. I wanted every detail, from who he texted to where he spent his money. And it paid off. Turns out Mark had skeletons beyond Lisa. Debts. A hidden relationship with another woman. A history of sketchy behavior at work that went unnoticed until I shined a light on it. I sent anonymous tips to the right people. His landlord, his new employer, he'd picked up some temporary gig to stay afloat. Even the woman he was secretly seeing. One carefully worded message. Thought you'd want to know who you're really dating. He's good at hiding things. Attached were photos, texts, everything. Mark's life unraveled like cheap thread. Evicted. Fired again. Alone. But while he spiraled, I turned my attention back to Lisa. She'd been trying to reach me, leaving voicemails filled with tears, apologies, and the occasional angry outburst when I didn't respond. She didn't understand the silence, that was the point. I wanted her to sit with it, to drown in it. But eventually I gave her what she wanted, a meeting. I texted her from a new number, keeping it short. Meet me at the park. Tomorrow. Noon. She replied within seconds. The next day, I arrived early, watching from a distance as she showed up, scanning the crowd nervously. She looked different, thinner, bags under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. The perfect image of a woman whose life was slipping through her fingers. I waited until she sat down on a bench, then approached casually. She looked up, relief flashing across her face. Ethan, she breathed, standing like she wanted to hug me. I stepped back. Sit. She froze, then slowly lowered herself back onto the bench. For a moment we just stared at each other. No words, just the weight of everything unspoken. Then I broke the silence. Why? I asked, not because I needed the answer I already knew, but because I wanted to hear her stumble over it. She swallowed hard, tears brimming. I don't know. I was lost. I made a mistake. I nodded slowly. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. You made choices. She flinched like the words were a slap. I miss you, she whispered. I still love you. I laughed, cold and hollow. You don't miss me. You miss the stability I gave you. The life you destroyed. Her lip trembled. I can fix this. We can fix this. I leaned in slightly, my voice low. You think this is about fixing something? Lisa, I'm not here to patch things up. I'm here to watch you break. Her face crumpled, tears spilling over. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Not the way I thought I would. No, satisfaction came from knowing this was just another crack in the foundation. And I wasn't done. Not yet. Lisa sat there, trembling, her tears dripping onto her lap like they held some kind of weight. Maybe they did to her. But not to me. Not anymore. I studied her face, trying to remember if I ever truly knew her. The woman I married was gone. Or maybe she never existed. Maybe Lisa had been wearing a mask the entire time, and I'd just been too blind to see the cracks forming beneath it. She sniffled, reaching for my hand like old habits still mattered. I pulled back before her fingers could even brush mine. You don't get to touch me, I said quietly. She froze, her face twisting with something between regret and humiliation. Good. She should sit in that discomfort. I know I messed up, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But we can move past this. We can go to therapy, we can... I cut her off with a sharp laugh. Therapy? She thought this was something we could fix? Like patching drywall after putting a fist through it. There's no we anymore, I said, leaning in slightly, just enough for her to feel how close I was while knowing she couldn't reach me. I didn't come here to talk about fixing anything. I came to tell you what's next. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I've filed for divorce. Her breath hitched. She clearly hadn't expected that. Not from me. She thought she still had some grip on me, like our history was a chain I couldn't break. It's over, Lisa. The papers will be at your door soon. I've already moved the money, canceled the joint accounts, and oh, don't bother trying to fight me for the house. It's in my name. You'll be out before you can finish packing. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. But, Ethan, please, she stammered. I don't have anywhere to go. I can't. That's not my problem. She sobbed then, real ugly sobs, the kind that twist a person's face into something almost unrecognizable. I stood up, towering over her, feeling nothing. "You chose this," I said softly. "You thought you'd get away with it. You thought I'd forgive you, that I'd be too weak to walk away. But here's the thing, Lisa." I leaned down, my face inches from hers. "You broke me, but I rebuilt myself without you." I turned and walked away without another word. But I wasn't done yet. Later that night, I sent one last message to Mark.
No threats, no anger.
Just a simple text. "She's all yours now. Good luck." But here's the thing. Lisa wasn't really his anymore. She wasn't anyone's. And that was the real revenge. Days passed after that meeting in the park. Lisa's calls turned from desperate to angry, then back to begging. I didn't answer. She showed up at my door once. I watched her through the peephole. Mascara smudged, hair a mess. Pounding her fist like that could undo everything. I never opened the door. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? You're pathetic. Mark." I stared at the screen for a moment, then replied, "Enjoy the leftovers." No response after that. Didn't need one. A week later, I heard Lisa had been fired. Apparently, word got around about her workplace relationship, courtesy of an anonymous tip with just enough proof to stir suspicion. She tried to reach out again. Texts, voicemails, even an email with the subject line, "Please, just talk to me." I didn't. Instead, I sent her one final message. This is what honesty feels like. No reply, just silence. Exactly what she deserved. Mark didn't handle the fallout well. Rumors spread fast. His eviction, job losses, and messy personal life painted a picture he couldn't outrun. The last time I saw him, he was outside a bar, drunk, arguing with someone on the phone. Pathetic. I didn't approach him, just watched from my car, satisfied. His life was now exactly what he'd helped create. Broken, chaotic, and empty. Months passed. The divorce was finalized. Clean, cold, and swift, just like I planned. Lisa tried to fight for scraps, but there was nothing left for her. I'd stripped away everything she thought was secure. No house, no money, no friends. She sent one last message. "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply, because It's been a year. I've moved on. Not just from Lisa, but from the bitterness. The anger served its purpose, and when it was done, I left it behind, just like I left her. Revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about reclaiming me. I don't think about Lisa or Mark anymore. Their downfall was just a chapter. But my story is still being written.